It's just we've got to break out of those silos, those boxes. So what we're looking at for next year in 2009, in October 2009, is we're going to run the 14th conference focused on low carbon innovation, or the low carbon innovation revolution, particularly linking into the major climate change conference in Copenhagen that will set the new paradigm in terms of carbon dioxide reduction.
Well, I think you should look at that from a holistic perspective, whether you look at products, services, or processes. For instance, if you take a product, you should think of where is it produced, how is it produced, how is it transported to the end user, what kind of, do you have to use consumables to use the product, or can you do it in other ways? And also the disposal at the end, very important. So you're really looking at the whole life cycle. And if that could use less carbon, that's a carbon innovation to me.
Well, I'm less interested in low carbon innovation than I am in zero carbon innovation or even negative carbon innovation. I think that one of the things that we're going to need to grapple with is what does it mean to actually have a light enough footprint on the planet that we are able to, in fact, heal the systems that we are currently making unstable and degrading. Right now, we are settling for merely less completely destructive, is usually the standard that we apply. And I think that in the very near future, we're going to, in fact, need to apply a standard of wholly positive and even, even restorative innovation.
Well, low carbon, or perhaps no or neutral, carbon neutral innovation, I think is a loaded concept. I've talked to a number of people, in fact worked on some projects, certainly interested in working with people like the Carbon Trust and the Carbon Fund in terms of identifying things like the carbon footprint. On the other hand, I've worked with people at places like the Chicago Climate Exchange who are very much proponents of carbon trading and capping. These are two very different schools of thought. The capping and trading, especially in this environment, the environment where we've been shocked into rethinking how we value things, might have some rough times ahead. I think the commoditization of pollution is strewn with problems. So I look at low carbon as what's embedded in the product on one hand, and what is a result in terms of a carbon footprint of the use of that product. If you put the two together in some kind of a life cycle scenario, you've got a carbon footprint. The embedded carbon, as such, is something that I'm very interested in pursuing on a product-by-product basis. That's something that can drive behavioral changes, because I can get a very fixed, reasonably easy to justify number on the carbon embedded in a product. Once I've got that number, I can basically generate policies across the board that'll allow me to tax or develop an allocation scheme that will drive behavior. And it'll drive behavior of the consumer because there's an additional cost. It'll drive behavior of the supplier because the supplier now is motivated to innovate toward carbon reduction without having to pay an imposed penalty. It's a market penalty. Cap and trade's another story. I think it is theoretically simpler, but practically harder. And by that I mean, if you look at the theory of carbon cap and trade, simple enough. You've got an emission standard you've got to meet. If you go below it, you can sell credits. The problem with that is if you're in a country that isn't, in the case of Kyoto, a signatory to Kyoto, you become a safe harbor for processes that have a big carbon footprint. And therefore, much like what happened in the United States with the toxic release inventory, an accounting of toxins released from manufacturing processes, over a period of time, those processes tended to migrate offshore. The reality in terms of the global impact was probably greater because they had even less mechanisms in place for pollution prevention. I can see the same kind of thing happening with carbon cap and trade. So I look to low carbon as something that can be allocated to individual products and processes, probably starting with a tax on fuels themselves, based on a pound-per-pound tax, which can be put into a policy quite readily.
For me, low-carbon innovation means that instead of looking at climate and climate change as a problem, you see that as an opportunity. Instead of saying, how much will it cost? We ask, how do we get there? And how do I provide something that makes me a winner in a low-carbon economy? So it's totally rethinking how environmental usually has been approached by companies as something they lobby a little bit against or try to mitigate, but really try to say, I want a part of this. This is one of the greatest transitions humanity has ever gone through when it comes to industrialization. I want to be a winner in that low-carbon economy. I want to look back and talk with my children and say that I was part of providing these goods and services that a low-carbon economy requires.